Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. Today we're going to be talking about what can be done to combat racism. And my guest is an expert on this topic. Dr. Susan Sturm is the George M. Jaffin Professor of Law and Social Responsibility and the founding director of the Center for Institutional and Social Change at Columbia Law School. Her scholarship and teaching focus on advancing racial equity and full participation in educational, legal, and cultural institutions, increasing access to justice, and the role of law and leadership in advancing institutional and social change. Her new book is What Might Be: Confronting Racism to Transform Our Institutions. Dr. Susan Sturm, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
I appreciate you being with me today. Let's just jump right into it. What inspired you to write What Might Be? I won't do the whole title, but What Might Be?
The inspiration came in part from my students and my former students, talking with them as I do so frequently about how they can become change agents, how they can navigate these kinds of contradictions that are built into trying to pursue justice through a mechanism that is itself sometimes unjust. They really encouraged me to try to share with a larger audience what they got from our interactions. And I've also worked with leaders like Nancy Cantor and Earl Lewis, who are the editors of the book series, who were really encouraging a book that would be about not just what needs to be changed, lots about what needs to be changed, but something that focuses on how do we actually make change and how do we do that in really difficult circumstances. And I'll just say one other thing, which is I've spent my life dealing with these paradoxes, these contradictions that are built into life and built into addressing racism, growing up in a family that was simultaneously loving and abusive, going to law school to pursue justice and being hit in the face with law's injustices and law's elitism and law's tendency sometimes to exclude, and then navigating being a person who cares a lot about race, who is herself white and has to navigate being both responsible, but also needing to step aside and create the space for people who have firsthand experience with racism. So all of these contradictions are things that keep me up at night. And I'm willing to share my struggles and to share the ways in which my own failures have been the windows into really being able to succeed in this work and make it so rewarding. So I wanted to share that with people so that anyone who wanted to become more of a change agent, who wanted to go beyond talk, who wanted to really do something in their everyday leadership would have some more tools for doing that.
And tools we certainly need, no doubt about that. Yeah, when you commented on the role of your students, I was really struck by that. So often today we hear about the mediocre student, the blasé student, the I can't learn anything student, that type of thing. But it sounds like they really were involved in this topic. What do you think promoted that with them? Had many of them experienced racism and other abuses?
I think it's so wonderful first that you picked up on the fact that students and the up and coming generation have so much capability and knowledge and wisdom that can get discounted in the cross-generational frustration. But I think part of what is so critical to preserving and pursuing democracy and full participation is to really build those multi-generational relationships that can happen so much between teachers and students, between leaders and people they are supervising. And what I saw was that students really were struggling with many different ways in which the environment was making life difficult for them, making them feel like they didn't belong. And some of that was around issues of race. Some of that was around people who were first generation students whose families did not go to college, whose families did not go to law school, who were not economically privileged and felt themselves in an environment that assumed that everyone was, and that assumed that people were coming from an insider stance and they had outsider perspectives. More and more students have family members or friends or community members who experienced incarceration or experienced challenges with immigration. So these were people who were struggling themselves with the very challenges that they wanted to help others address. And then there were people who learned that they were privileged in certain ways, but that the same institutions that were really creating issues for those who we recognize as marginalized were also creating issues for them. So, for example, people who want to go into the work of addressing public safety or criminal justice or immigration, what they found when they started working in these institutions is that the same conditions that dehumanize the people going through them also dehumanize the people who were working for those institutions. So I had students who talked to people who were directly impacted from incarceration and saying, I relate to some of the things that you're experiencing because I see how bureaucracies and institutions can do the same thing to me, can be insensitive to me in the same way they are to you. So I do think there's a lot of commitment, and also students are really, they're fighting for their future. They're fighting for their institutions. They're fighting for their ability to want to bring children into the world. So they are our partners in this work, and they've certainly pushed me to do what I do as well as I possibly can in partnership with them.
Mhm. Now, racism is a term, and racism as a practice is something we've had in this country since day one, probably, no doubt about it. People say, "Oh, there's no racism." Well, good luck on that. There is racism, and I'll show you in places where it is. But why did you decide at this juncture? I know you had motivational support from your students and that type of thing, but was there some event or a series of events that said to you, this is the ideal time to share the information you have about what we can do to combat racism?
I have to credit my writing of the book to the series that my book is a part of called Our Compelling Interest. And that series was really triggered by a concern that predated our current crisis, which is that people undervalue the importance of addressing issues of race and racism because they think of it as something that's only for a particular group without recognizing what I call linked fate, which is that our ability to prosper and thrive and even survive depends upon our creating full participation, the capacity of people of all different races, backgrounds, genders, nationalities to be able to access the institutions that define our ability to thrive and to succeed in those institutions, to be supported, to have voice, and very importantly, to have the opportunity to contribute to the thriving of others. And with the retrenchment of the law around issues of addressing race and a kind of backlash to really what is an increasing recognition of the importance of creating these conditions of full participation. Earl Lewis and Nancy Cantor came together to create this series about how important it is and how possible it is and how valuable it is to continue to address these kinds of issues in our current environment. I was invited into this process, and they really encouraged me to take up this moment, to take the lessons that I've learned over the last decades to a larger audience. And I'm so grateful because that concern about building the capacity of everyday leaders, of everyday people to be able to push for democracy, to be able to push for participation, to create those conditions in the places where they live, where they work, where they go to school, their children go to school, those are the seeds of our broader democracy, of our broader ability to advance equity and to create these really the continuation of our democracy. And so I'm so grateful that I made the decision to share the book when I did, even though it's easy to say, wow, is this like fiddling on the deck of the Titanic? But the answer to that is we have to step in these ways, because if we don't, we know we will fail. And that part of the reason that we have some of the challenge we do is that maybe we have left the concerns about democracy, full participation, racism to others, and that we have to take that responsibility in our communities, in our institutions, in our homes, for ourselves, because that's the only way that democracy can flourish.
It certainly is. And we're going to come back in just a moment to talk about how we can identify if racism is in our lives and what we can do to oppose racism. Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is a privately funded, independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guest. We'd invite our viewers to go to our website at www.globalconnectionstelevision.com to view previous programs. Also, if you're involved with the PBS or community access television station, or perhaps an educational institution that has an intra-campus television hookup, or you have a podcast, or you just have a computer, you like our shows and you would like to share them, please feel free to do so. Global Connections Television is provided at no cost as a public service to help us better understand international issues and how they impact our lives. Today, we're taking a look at that broad area of racism and what can be done to combat it. My guest is an expert on this topic. Dr. Susan Sturm is a George M. Jaffin Professor of Law and Social Responsibility, and she is the founding director of the Center for Institutional and Social Change at Columbia Law School. Her recent book is What Might Be: Confronting Racism to Transform Our Institutions. We left it a moment ago. We all experience racism to some degree. You can identify, maybe growing up, I know for sure, in just a variety of ways, and we still do to some degree. But how can we be more aware of the racism that may exist, not saying that we are racist, but may exist in our ambiance? And what can we do? Are there lessons that we can learn or applications we can apply to combat this racism?
I think it's important to start by just defining what we mean, what I mean when we use the term racism. So often, in part because of the way the courts have defined discrimination, people think of racism as something that bad people do when they exclude people because of the color of their skin. And that is certainly one kind of problem that produces the kinds of disparities in opportunity and in life circumstances that exist across race. But I think we need to think about race and racial exclusion in a way that looks more broadly at who has the opportunity to prosper and thrive, who gets the resources, and does society care if there is a whole group of people defined by race who are excluded from or marginalized from living decent lives, from being treated with respect, from feeling like they belong and that their well-being matters? And if we think about concerns about race in that way, first of all, it takes away the notion that if there's a problem with race, there must be a bad person who's making that happen. I think the explicit kinds of racism, I don't like you or I don't want to deal with you because you are, and then fill in the blank, whatever race, uh, those are ones that are important, but they're just the tip of the iceberg. And what's really happening is that we have systems that are systematically dehumanizing people. But because those are people who have black or brown skin, the larger society does not take up that challenge, whether it's healthcare or whether it's the conditions of our justice system or the way the police operate or our schools, in a way that will do something about those really disparate and dehumanizing conditions that people disproportionately experience if they are people of color. So we have to start there. And then we can ask a set of questions that are not, did you say something that you shouldn't have said? But rather that are asking the question framed around this idea of full participation. Full participation is a value that I think people can come together around, that people of all different races and backgrounds and identities should be able to fully participate in the institutions that matter. Well, let's ask the question seriously and rigorously, who is and who is not able to fully participate? This is the kind of question that, for example, the University of Maryland, Baltimore County asked when it looked at the question of who is able to succeed and thrive in learning and succeeding and excelling in the sciences and technology. And when you ask that question in a really database rigorous way, you will, in the institutions that both in the United States and abroad, you will very frequently find that there are many people who are not thriving, who are not able to fully participate, and that group is disproportionately people who are Black or brown. And then you can ask, well, why is that happening? What is it about the way we are treating our people or setting up our criteria that are making it so that groups of people are not thriving? And when we ask that question, we can start treating issues of race and racism as what my dear friend, departed Lonnie Guinier, called the miner's canary, which is this is a group that is likely to experience toxic conditions more profoundly and more visibly because they have been marginalized. But those toxic conditions don't only affect them. It wasn't only Black and brown kids that were suffering from the fact that science was being taught in a way that was intended to weed people out and make sure they fail. And when that question was asked, who's succeeding and not succeeding and why, then the University of Maryland, Baltimore County could change the way science was being taught, not only for Black and brown boys and girls, but for everybody. And as a result of that, as a systematic practice over many, many years, not only were Black and brown kids able to succeed and thrive in the sciences at UMBC, but so many other people were as well because the culture was transformed not only for people of color, but for everyone.
The textbooks are absolutely critical as to how they're written. And in the past, so many of them in states, and I'll just use, I think it was Oklahoma as a example, a whole community, a Black community was wiped out back in around 1920, something like that. And they didn't even bother to put that in the textbooks until recently. And now you see a purging of so many of these incidents in so many states around the country. Well, unfortunately, we're down to our last 2 minutes, so I'm going to give you the hardest question. Diversity, equality, and inclusion, DEI. That's been part of our lexicon for years. First off, does anybody, I know you understand it, but when I hear people throwing this term around, I really wonder if they understand it. Do they understand it? And how does it tie in to combating the problem we're talking about today?
Part of the reason people don't understand it is that it's a kind of label that has been placed on a whole variety of practices, some of which are very effective and transformative and really go along with what I've been talking about as full participation, and some of which are more kind of window dressing or things that are check the box, or some of the programs that have been, I would say, vilified by the current federal government in the United States. And so I think it's really important, first of all, that people recognize that it's important to get more concrete about what we're talking about, that we not just respond to a label, that we really ask the question, what kind of practice are we talking about here? Most of the programs that are currently practiced are ones that are very sensitive to and conform to discrimination law and anti-discrimination law in the United States. So just because an executive order says that something is not allowed, that does not mean that it's not allowed as a matter of law. So it's really important to make that distinction. And secondly, it's really important to ask the question, why is it so important to continue to address race, gender, and other categories of identity and exclusion in your environment? Why is this important to the organization's mission? And I would say that full participation is critical to democracy. We cannot have a real democracy if we don't have full participation. Race and racism, which are part of what has been lumped under the label of DEI, are so critical to full participation. So it's so important to address issues of race and racism because that's critical to democracy. And even though there's a contradiction there, we have to both address race, but also do so in a way that is more universal. We have to be able to hold that contradiction in order to hold on to our democracy.
Exactly. You're absolutely right. And we have to learn what we're talking about with these terms and not just accept them as somebody else interprets them, or we hear a dog whistle about them or something like that. Well, this is a fascinating topic. It's an extremely important topic, and we'll have to come back to revisit it because unfortunately we are out of time. But Dr. Susan Sturm, I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
My pleasure. Thank you. I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.